Hello. Hi, everyone. And hi to our guests, Emily Brundige and Madison Bateman. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, guys. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. I know a lot of you are really interested in writing for animation, so this will be a really great episode for you. Um, uh, Madison, tell us a little bit about your stuff you've worked on, your career, what
My
you're up to.
journey.
Yeah.
Well, I went to school at UT Austin for radio, television, film, and so there I studied screenwriting and producing. I moved out to Los Angeles in 2009. Kind of gave up on my dreams of writing and just went, well, what pays the bills? And so I ended up getting into production. I had no idea that I was going to be working in animation. Wasn't even on my radar. But I had this horrible job at a marketing company that was really just one guy who was a club promoter. Awful. And so I quit that job and panicked. And I got a call from Titmouse Animation Studios the next day to be a PA on Metalocalypse. And it seemed like a place that I really wanted to work. I liked the atmosphere and I liked the, kind of the artist's den. So I went over there. I got hired because I liked spreadsheets and like data management. And then I kind of started learning more and more about animation and reading more scripts and figuring out, how it worked and all of the different, stops along the pipeline. And I eventually was asked to, when the head of the studio sold a show to Disney, he asked me to be the writer's assistant, to be on through all of Story, because I was really good at spelling and grammar. So like, you never know what's going to get you into writing. And so, yeah, I was the writer's assistant then. That show unfortunately got canceled. So I went back into production for a year, but I, really wanted to write. So I talked to HR and they found me a position on another show. I ended up getting staffed on that show, and the rest is history. So I've been on, Turbo Fast for DreamWorks, Home Adventures with Tip and O on DreamWorks, and that's how I know Emily. DuckTales over at Disney, and now I'm on The Ghost and Molly McGee over at Disney.
Great. Cool. And when is that?
She's story editor.
Oh yeah, I'm like the head writer now.
That's great. And when is Molly McGee set to come out?
We don't have a date yet, but sometime in 2021.
Okay, cool. Great. And yeah, I've known you, Madison, since our Titmouse days. So kick it on over to Emily. Emily, how about you? Tell us about your journey.
Sure. So I went to UC Berkeley for undergraduate and I studied art and creative writing. And then I went to Cal Arts for grad school in experimental animation. And I made a short film there called Pubertina that was like my first year film. It was kind of crappy, but it had heart. It had a message.
That's the charm.
A voice. And there was a producer in the audience of one of our screenings, which is weird because no one ever really came to the experimental animation showcases. Only the character animation was much more popular.
Yeah, we got some
like
Pubertina fans in the chat. Cool.
Oh,
Pubes fans.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So then I was approached by this woman who saw the short film, and she said, we're starting up this new YouTube channel called Shut Up Cartoons, and we're looking for, we know we have some girls in our audience, make up some of the demographic, and we're looking for a female voice driven show. So if you want to pitch Pubertina or a different show, we'd love to hear your pitch. And I ended up just putting together a quick pitch packet. I didn't really know what that looked like, but my approximation of one for Pubertina, and pitched it. They said great, and they gave me a really small budget to make 10 short episodes. Then I ended up making another season of 10 shorts and a holiday special. And in the meantime, because I was getting a lot of attention, both negative and positive, for Pubertina, I was invited to pitch to Cartoon Network and other studios, and I got an agent because of the web series. And then I got my first, I pitched. I had a show in development at Disney, and then I was soon after that staffed on my first staff writing job on Star versus the Forces of Evil. And that happened partly because of Pubertina, because Darren, the showrunner, was aware of it and really liked it, and partly because I knew Darren through CalArts and through some mutual friends. She kind of gave me a chance. I was really green, and that didn't last very long because they cut their staff and a bunch of other stuff for season pains. But then soon after, then I was doing a lot of freelance for different shows, and I ended up getting staffed on Home, where I met Madison, and had a show in development at DreamWorks too called Harvey's, whatever it's called, Harvey Girls Forever. It's had different titles, but I developed it and I EP'd it I was the showrunner for like 5 months, and then I was replaced by a guy. And then after that, I was story editor on Hilda last year. And now I'm currently head writer on a show called Big Nate that's just starting up at Nickelodeon.
Cool. Do you you were on season 2 of Hilda, right? That's not out yet.
It's new stories, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know if you're, I know you're on Big Nate right now, but do you see yourself returning to Hilda in the future?
Oh, I think that would only be if they got an additional season. But I would love to work on it again, but we'll just see. I have a few different projects and a few different irons in the fire. So
cool.
I'm gonna see where they take me.
And so you, just some of the names of things you've worked on: Big Nate, Home with Tip and O,
Teen Titans Go, DC Superhero Girls. Am I missing something? I don't know. Different. Yeah, but the only shows I've been staffed on are Star, Home, and Harvey Girls Forever, and then Hilda and Big Nate.
Cool.
And then I've been freelancing in between those times.
Hopefully Hilda gets more too. I know it's
I love it.
Beloved show. I love seeing people in the chat saying how much they like Pubertina. That's great.
That's awesome. That really warms my heart.
All right, we can jump right into questions. From Christy, this is probably the biggest writer's question. How do you combat writer's block?
Madison?
I mean, that's
a hard one.
I think that I never get writer's block for things that I'm on. If it's a staff show, you don't have time for writer's block, and often, like, there's just not. So basically, when you're in a writer's room, this is not how it works everywhere, but most of the times you'll be breaking stories together. So you kind of already know what the story is. So then you only have like a week to turn things around. So you don't really have time for a writer's block. And you also sort of have better benchmarks for where your writing is going. if you're talking about in your own personal writing, oh boy, good luck.
Yeah.
I think setting deadlines for yourself, and probably a to-do list of like, okay, well, now I'm going to break the story. And if you haven't broken the story in the time allotted, call your other writer friends. You know,
Yeah.
that's my book over there.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that. I pretty much totally agree with everything Madison said. I think it's a lot harder, like, for example, if you're writing an original pilot, because you have to find an idea that you feel invested in enough to write like a 22-minute pilot usually, or 11-minute, whatever you're doing, that you feel like has something to say and blah, blah, blah. And it can feel like a lot of pressure. So I tend to, like, if I come up with an idea, I kind of test it, like try to see if it has legs. Like, could this continue on as a series? Is it just one story? And kind of run those tests through it. And if it just doesn't feel strong enough and it's not really like pulling me in, then I'll move on. And as far as like inspiration, that's really hard. Like, it just strikes from different places and at different times. And I think that's like the hardest process is when you're brainstorming in the very early phase of coming up with an idea is like a really hard, difficult process.
Because it can be anything at the beginning, and then you have to start making choices and whittling it down. And that's really hard. And I know from my own experience, I don't want to make those choices. I still want it to be infinite possibilities, but set yourself
scary.
Yeah, give yourself deadlines and treat it like you were on a show. You don't have time.
Yeah, there's a difference between having writer's block and procrastinating, right? So if you find yourself like weeks are passing and you're not writing anything, then what you can do is just make yourself start writing. Like anything to get words on a page or computer page is like, will always lead to something, just opening your mind up.
Yep.
Great. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this. This question from Rosam. Do you have to be very good at telling jokes when creating a dialogue for characters? I'm assuming you mean in TV animation.
It depends on the show.
Yeah, if it's a comedy or not.
Yeah, if it's a comedy and if it's a joke-packed comedy, it's like the style of the writing on the show. So like Madison, when you were on DuckTales, I imagine you didn't feel the pressure to constantly be making jokes because there's a lot of action too. Or what was that like?
No, it was still like, we had somebody in the room. I think even in a joke dense room, I think you need to find your niche. So you don't have to be the one who's like very joke forward if you have two other people in the room who are heavy on jokes. You might be the person who is good at structure, or can you just take him upstairs? No. Sorry, the cat is behind me, like making tons of noise. So like, you don't always have to be the funniest person in the room, even if it's on Joke Didn't Show. But you have to understand like humor and Greg, you're like right on the screen. Quarantine, guys. Quarantine.
This is what we got. It's quarantine life.
Yep. So, basically, you need to know how to be funny. You need to know how to place jokes, especially jokes that fit within the world of your show. But you don't have to be the funniest person in the room.
I do think that depends, a lot of caveat. Like if you're freelancing, for example, on a show that's very joke heavy,
Yeah.
then you're expected to write those jokes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
but
when you don't have
usually
a
like a showrunner, what Madison's saying will happen. Like a showrunner will structure their writer's room so they have like exactly what you're saying. Like make sure I have someone who's great with structure. Oh, this person's a great joke maker.
Mhm.
But I've definitely like I'm not the best jokey person, but I've definitely felt pressure on certain shows to write them. And you know, you just do your best and you learn, just like what Madison's saying, the style of jokes that is right on a certain show. It's different on each show. So I would say for your own writing, I would do what's funny to you.
Make yourself laugh.
Yeah.
Cool. This is from Alexander. When it comes to developing shows based off of properties that already exist, how do you go about that?
Depends on each show. So it depends what the IP is, the original property. So like on Harvey Girls, that was a property that it's beloved by some of our parents, maybe, but a lot of people aren't familiar with those characters. So I felt like I had a lot of freedom to do what I want to do with the show and the characters and kind of take what was at the heart of the comics, but then bring it into, you know, a different incarnation. And then with other shows, like with Big Nate, the show I'm currently on, we work with the author and we're trying to be as true to his vision as possible, because it has a huge audience and following. I think that's kind of like what sometimes makes the difference. Like, do enough people care? Kind of.
And Madison, for you working on DuckTales, like, how was it being a part of that show in the writing process to like kind of do what you wanted with the characters versus how much of the characters already there?
Yeah, so it is a heritage property, you know, with a really lengthy history, both in comics and television. And, you know, the character, Donald Duck is a character that is, you know, a longtime legacy character for Disney. You know, it's one of the big four. So we kind of dealt with, you know, a lot of, just by the nature of it being a property developed in the last century, most of the characters are male. Most of the women are not great portrayals of women. And, you know, even in the old show, Webby was treated as a joke, even though a lot of the time she would solve the episode. The way that the boys treated her told the audience that you're not supposed to like her.
Yeah.
So, you know, we kind of looked at like, okay, well, let's reimagine this. Let's figure out how to take these characters and keep them true to themselves, but, you know, either beef up some of the female characters or kind of take this into a new century for a new audience, for a more modern audience. You know, with Fenton Crackshell Cabrera, we didn't want to stick to the old cartoon. You know, with Gandra D, she was like this bombshell character with like goose boobs. You know, so we didn't really want to stick to those old weird stereotypes.
Sure.
I wanted to dimensionalize them, which, you know, in some instances you can do, and some instances like Scrooge McDuck, you know, there's things that are hard and fast that you can't really change about a character. So it's just kind of finding that balance between, okay, what's the core of the character, and what matters about the character that's beloved, and then, okay, so how do we take that nugget and make it a different character?
Mm-hmm. I think you guys did a fantastic job with Webby, and I'm blanking on the on her mom's. Yeah, that's right. In the original show, is just like Webby's like a crybaby, and Mrs. Beakley's like a worrywart and a maid, and that's it. So you definitely added a lot to their characters.
Yeah, they didn't have a lot of women writers on the old show. So,
yeah.
Unfortunately.
Next question from Sydney. Was there ever a time where you were working... was there ever a time, or what is your process like working on a time crunch for a particular episode? Have you dealt with time crunches on stuff that you've written? Is what they're asking, I think.
I'm sure Madison has. Usually I have time crunches because I'm juggling multiple projects.
Yeah, usually you're writing multiple things at once.
Yeah. So that I just try my best to stagger as much as possible the different projects. But when I do have two things, I think it's just sometimes you have to write into the night. It's harder now that I have a kid. I have a toddler. So I saw my weekends suddenly, they used to be like saved for work, doing more work. I'd usually work through the weekends too, but now that's harder. Although my parents help me out.
That's nice.
But yeah, it's just I have a lot more limited time now, so I have to be in a way like more picky about that. But honestly, I can't speak so much to that because I've had really respectful writing schedules for the most part. I mean, on Home, it was a little tough sometimes.
Well, 11-minute animation is a tight schedule. But
yeah, when you have a big episode order, sometimes you have to come up with stories right away. But it's kind of fun. I don't know about you, Madison, but sometimes it can be fun to have that work under that pressure.
Yes.
Like you can
exhilarating.
Bring more productivity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially because there's always going to be times when you're at a second draft and you have to actually go back to a page one rewrite. There's going to be times where something happens, you get a crazy note that like unravels the whole episode and you've got to rewrite it in a day or so. And you'd be surprised you can do it. It's stressful, but not as terrible as you would think.
And I think like when you're on a show, and this is how it should be, if you're struggling with a certain problem when you're working on your episode, you should feel free to call upon your colleagues, the other writers, or your story editor or showrunner, whoever, to help if you hit a hard place. That should be the norm, but sometimes it's not, or sometimes people feel like they can't ask for help.
Yeah. Or sometimes they feel like, if I ask for help, I am admitting a weakness. No.
Exactly.
TV is a collaborative medium. The room is there for a reason.
Yeah. And I love that that collaboration that happens, because I feel limited just myself writing something sometimes, and I really crave that feedback and other people's ideas. So
yeah, I much prefer a writer's room over writing alone. It's just I love that collaborative there. A question from Tim, and Matt, I'm ready for the next batch of questions, please. From Tim, if I want to transfer from writing feature animation to writing for TV, what is the main difference? What do I have to look out for? Have either of you, what was that? Go ahead.
Time.
Okay.
you don't have the same amount of time. One, you have way fewer pages. Also, just time. I think a lot of film schools, especially when we went to school, maybe not anymore, but TV wasn't, the only prestige TV that was on was Mad Men when I was in college. So like TV wasn't really a thing that they wanted to teach us. So, it was all features. And I think, you already know 3-act structure, so that's great. It's just going to be figuring out the pacing for either 11 minutes or 22s, whichever format you are looking into. Just thinner stories,
Yep. You just have to streamline your stories more, and I'd suggest practicing. So writing a pilot, an animation pilot, looking at trying to find animation scripts, TV scripts you can read. But just like anything else, it just takes practice. But I don't know if the question was like, how do I job-wise, like bridge over or something, but
I guess what's the main difference between feature writing and TV writing?
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the schedule
we answered.
You won't be taking 3 months to a year to write things anymore. You've got 2 weeks. Good luck.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Features like, we're making this movie in 4 years. Plenty of time. I'm so sorry. Althea. If you're writing a spec or original pilot sample, how much feedback should you get before your sample isn't a true indicator of your capabilities?
That's a great question. Yeah. I'd say don't ask people whose opinions you don't respect.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't just ask people for feedback to get feedback.
Yeah.
You should be asking people you respect and who you think can give you valuable feedback. Because for both parties, like, the worst thing is when someone asks you for feedback from the other side and they don't really want to hear it, or they don't really want to make changes, or So first of all, like, make sure that you're willing to hear feedback too, because if you have soft skin, it can be hard to get the dose of criticism. But I would recommend getting used to not taking things personally and looking at things
taking notes will be your job. So
yeah. So yeah, I think it's more valuable to ask a few people or even one person you really respect than asking anyone you can.
Yeah. And I think on the other side, an important aspect of note giving, I think especially when we're young and green, we kind of give notes in a way that's like, here's how I would do it. And what note givers down the line have realized is that this isn't about what I would do. I'm strengthening your vision. So more along the lines of exec notes of like, hey, so this isn't clear. I'm not understanding this character's motivation. And sometimes you as the writer understand intrinsically what that motivation is. You just need to make it clearer on the page. So finding people who can give you good notes that like get to the heart of what the issues are and not changing your voice.
Another thing that can be helpful is if you feel like you're lacking in a certain area, it's great to specify to the person looking at your script, I'd love you to pay attention to structure, or if my jokes are working, or whatever it is you're specifically worried about. That can really help people know what feedback they should be giving you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Fantastic advice. Thank you both.
Cool.
From Next question from Eric. How hard is it? How hard is it, or what's it like to get a manager to read your stuff?
Emily, you're the only one who has a manager here.
It's tough. It's tough. I wouldn't worry about getting a manager, especially in animation. You don't need a agent or a manager. It can be helpful when you are getting when you're creating shows, especially, and pitching. But really you don't need one, because the animation community is so small, and what you'll find is a lot of Hollywood doesn't care about especially kids animation, because it doesn't make them that much money in commissions.
Yeah.
So it's like
you're still getting your own jobs even if you have a manager, so
yeah, absolutely. I was with an agency, a big agency, for like 8 years, UTA, and I don't know if they brought me one job. So yeah, I think that it's more important actually to make friends in animation, and talk to people you admire, like maybe you admire us, I don't know, but like doing in these talks. But yeah, as far as getting your stuff read, that's also tough. I don't know if you agree, Madison, but it's like takes a lot of energy, to be totally honest, to read a script and give
I read 40
feedback.
I read 40 like 5 weeks ago, so yes,
Oh
it takes
God.
a lot of energy.
Yeah, it's honestly not the same as like reviewing someone's storyboards or designs. I feel it's like it really takes a lot of time and concentration personally. So I think yeah, just making the connections and asking for advice, like letting people know that you're interested in getting into writing for animation, letting people know you're looking specifically for the writer's assistant job, or whatever
like
it is.
The writer's assistant position. It's a writer's assistant and script coordinator position in one in animation, and that is really a pipeline into writing. Our writer's assistant had 4 scripts this year, so
and I've seen that. I know it doesn't happen that way a lot of the time in live action, but of the shows I've been on in animation, I've seen that happen basically every time. So that's a great way in. The other thing I recommend is like making films. I mean, because you can't really, like, there's no such thing as like, look at my script. Isn't it great? Look.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's not how we digest writing really in the real world. So I think like if you can make your own short, even if it's really simple, if it gets across your writing sensibility and voice, like that's helpful, or comics or whatever. Yeah, but it is tough. I'd say like writing is for animation is a really niche, it's a hard
but you know,
job
like
to get, but don't give up the fight.
And I would say like make connections, which I know sounds gross, so don't do it in a way of like, what can you do for me? And I'm only talking to for that. But feel free to like, if people's DMs are open, don't like go across the board and just DM people. But like, you know, if you see somebody whose work you admire, follow them. Sometimes they follow you back. You can respectfully email or DM somebody, hey, you know, I'm looking to get into animation writing. Would you, normally I'd say, hey, can I take you out to coffee and ask you some questions? Now you might have to say, hey, do you mind, would you be open to having a quick Zoom call just to, I'd love to pick your brain, stuff like that. I wanted to hire this writer on my show who, I mean, unluckily, but luckily she got a different job, but she followed me. I followed her back. She DM'd me like, hey, I really love, you know, your career. Just saying hi. I emailed her back and was like, hey, well, I see that you're working for a friend of mine. send me your samples. And her samples were fantastic. And so, you know, I put her forward for a bunch of jobs. So,
For
you know,
staff writing jobs, Madison?
mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you know, stuff like that's the best case scenario, but you know, that's also how I found my mentee. I'm mentoring a writer from my college who I found on Twitter.
Cool.
So just try and make as many connections as you can.
Eric, I saw your counter question in the chat, so I hope all that they just mentioned helps. Next question we have from Penny. I have written a few children's books that are currently on Amazon. How hard is it to get into writing for animation?
I guess like it's the same as you'll be in a similar position to anyone else just starting to write for animation. Like there's not a clear bridge between writing books and writing scripts. It's going to be a learning process. But I would say try to get a hold of some scripts, live action animation, and see what they're doing and the language of screenwriting, because there's definitely like a language you have to learn. And that comes by looking at other scripts and also finding just what works for you. But I'd say like the first thing that I had to learn for screenwriting was just formatting. Because if I'm reading scripts and I'm reading a script that looks really weird, like
written in Word,
it's not formatted properly.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an immediate goes in the trash. I'm not even reading it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it tells me that they're not ready to be on a show. And even so, Madison, you seem more generous than me, because like there are a lot of people I would consider with no experience for a writer's assistant, but they'd have to like blow me out of the water. If
to be fair, she's already writing on another show.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah, I mean, I like to see, unless they're really great and they've had some kind of training, they've been a writer's assistant or something. I like to see a little experience usually. So I'm saying, like, even to be considered for a writer's assistant, which if I were a showrunner, in my mind, it's like, I would like this to be a person I could see writing on the show. So I'd still want to see that they can do basic like script formatting and use Final Draft or Highland or whatever, preferably Final Draft though. But I don't remember what the question was.
Well, the next
bridging
question,
from, yeah.
The next question is also kind of this is very similar. From Eric, he's asking how competitive is it to land a job in the animation industry in writing? Do you have any writing exercises that you recommend?
No writing exercises, but it is competitive. It's a small pond.
Yeah.
That's not to say that like new voices aren't welcome. It's just it's an industry about who you know, so it's competitive in that way. Also, our rooms where live action comedies can be 16 people. Animation is the average I've seen is around 4.
Yeah.
So
our show on Big Nate, I'm the head writer, and then we have 2 other staff writers, and then a script coordinator. So it's pretty small.
Yeah.
So
very competitive.
And then it's not only competitive, but then like if I were to be staffing a show, I'd also want to be representing as many different types of people as possible, honestly. So I'm also thinking about diversity and all of that. So it's like, yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. Most of the people I know and who are still trying to get into the industry, I go, well, what would you like to do? And they go writing. I'm just like, it's really
Yeah,
competitive.
a lot of
Best of luck to
people
you.
want
But
to do it.
yeah.
And here's
But
the thing.
yeah. What were you gonna say?
I mean, here's the thing, like, I do recommend people work in production first. Even if you're a PA or a production secretary, it's really important to understand the pipeline,
Mhm.
the animation pipeline of like, okay, so what I write affects the board artists and the designers for the backgrounds and the props and the characters, and you know, it affects layout, and here's how it affects animation, and here, you know, so
Any job you can get in
yeah.
animation. Yeah.
And I think understanding how, like, you can't write a crowd scene in every episode because you're literally killing everyone down the line.
Yeah.
You know, how your job fits into the larger picture is important. So I would say take a production job, and then you have access to the writers. You can ask them to lunch. You can ask to say, hey, you know, I want to write. Can I just ask you some questions? You know, can we go to lunch or can we have a call?
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. And now that I think about it, like that was your path, Madison, but it was also one of the staff writers on our show started as a PA. Our script coordinator was a PA on our last job, or
Mhm.
production coordinator, can't remember. But that's another great way just to get your foot in the door. And I definitely feel a lot more comfortable when people reach out to me within the studio that I'm in. Like there's like a level of like, you feel also like an obligation to,
Investment, yeah.
investment. I said obligation, but
Tomato, tomato, really.
yeah.
Yeah.
From Chloe, she asks, is there such a thing as a writing portfolio? If so, what's a good thing to include in it if you're starting out?
It's just your samples.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's what I've been hearing is usually original pilot and a spec script is what people seem to be doing these days. But really, it's like just have a good piece of writing, a script.
Yeah, I would rather you have
strong.
one good sample than two mediocre ones. Also, no one's reading both samples.
Mhm.
Like we said, reading scripts is an extreme drain on like time and energy. I'm not going to read both of your samples. Send me your best one.
Yeah.
And
that's usually the norm is you'll get one sample from each writer who's submitted. So,
but it's also nice to have like kind of a range. So, you know, I'm on a supernatural show now. So if you have a supernatural sample, let's say you have, ideally you're supposed to be writing a new sample every year. So, you know, every year that you're trying to be a writer, you'll have another sample. I don't know if that's necessary, but, you know, if you had 4 or 5 samples, you know, of everything that you're interested in. Okay, well, here's my more supernatural one. Oh, here's a spec of Brooklyn Nine-Nine for this comedy show. You know, you can kind of pick and choose what is the best version to send out. I send out production samples. I'm not sending out my anything original because I write hour-long dramas. So I'm just sending episodes I've written of shows. So it kind of runs the gamut.
From Cam, a lot of people would say it's a lot easier to spot good art versus spotting good writing. What often says, quote, good writer to you?
oh gosh.
I think for me on the page, a good writer for me is maybe not what comes across on screen that's out of your control, but what makes a good writer for me on the page is when I'm invested from page 1, and that there's a sense of like tension within the scenes, and that's not like anger or like two characters are almost going to fight. Tension is like that tense play between like, is something going to happen? Is something going to go wrong? Are they going to get what they want? Just kind of a feeling of, I want to be invested. I'm wondering what's going to happen. And kind of a sense of playfulness on the page that kind of gives a good pacing.
That's great. Yeah.
I think that's really good advice. I mean,
Yes,
I think,
suspense. Sorry.
yeah, truly, a lot of people won't read past the third page or so when they get like a pile of scripts. So you need to be grabbed if you want the person, you want to grab the reader so they keep reading at least to page 10, or something. because all, even if I only get halfway through, but I'm like, I get it, I like this person's writing, it's not even necessary. It's just you gotta engage. And I would, and it is subjective. So a certain showrunner is going to be looking for something that's in line with their sensibility usually. Or the show's sensibility. So the best thing you can do is be true to yourself, because like, I don't know, in the end you want to be like hired because you have an interesting voice, and that you're not like, I don't know, I think that's going to come through stronger and more impressively than if you're trying to sound like another writer. Or
you're being hired for your voice, and if you're trying to emulate somebody else's voice in your sample, then then they're hiring the wrong person. They're hiring that sample voice instead of your voice. Then again, I think I would prefer to read a spec sometimes. I know it's difficult now because of audience fracturing, so not everybody watches the same shows. But it's nice if you can write a great pilot, but if you can't take my notes, and if you can't hit the voice of the show and the voice of the characters on this show, you're not going to last. So sometimes I do prefer specs because, does this sound like Officer Peralta? Does this fit the world of Brooklyn Nine-Nine? Sometimes it's easy to go, okay, they're understanding the world, they're understanding the characters.
Yeah, I've seen people hired from both specs and original pilots. So it's just like, what's your best piece of writing that you feel showcases your talent the best?
Yeah. I've hired somebody off of a spec, and I think I read half a page, and I went, yeah, okay, yep.
Wow, cool. From Allison, do you have any advice for someone who lives all the way in Maine, has no connections, and wants to get a job as a writer in the animation industry?
Move to LA. Sorry.
It's quarantine, baby.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, use quarantine your, advantage, but
yeah. I mean, yeah, when it's safe to go outside again. Something that really helped me being in LA was going to animation events, mixers.
For sure.
They're back in the day. There are a lot that are public or that you just have to RSVP to. But there are a lot of ways to meet people in the animation community. Comic-Con too. Things like that don't.
All kinds of women in animation. They always have mixers.
If you're a lady or a man or any gender.
Emily, I met you at an art show.
Yeah, we met at an art show.
So there you go. When Meltdown Comics was around, there was a lot more art shows. But
yeah.
As soon as we get past the pandemic, hopefully
But I guess
things
now
like that will happen again.
use this time to really write and
Yeah.
hone in on your writing, and you can reach out via messages, DMs, and that sort of thing.
And technically, you know, you could be a writer's assistant on a show, you know, remotely. And I guess if you had connections, you could write freelance episodes from Maine, but it's not a business where you can't, if you're not established, you can't really not be here. So
I feel bad. So many of the questions we've been getting on this show during the summer has involved like not having a pandemic around. So it's like, you know,
wear a mask, stay inside.
Yeah. From Pasha, what was for each of you the most challenging story you've had to write, and how did you handle it?
Emily, do you have an answer for this?
Every story, most of my scripts are challenging for me to write, because it's always intimidating when you know you have to accomplish something and you're just starting to write it. It feels like a lot, just personally speaking. And I'm trying to think though. I guess like in general, more mathy stories are hard for me. Like, for example, if you're telling like the Hangover type of story where like there are a lot of pieces that come together at the end, I hate shit like that. I hate writing it because I hate math. To me, that's like math. I like to write more just like character driven stories that aren't so like tricky plot wise, or like I wouldn't want to write a Memento story. It's not my that's just my taste though.
I don't mind writing those. The problem comes when you get a note that pulls one thread that affects all of the other beats, and you're like,
oh no.
I can't really think of it. I think everything is a little bit challenging in its own way. I think where it gets challenging for me is when I've written it too much, or I've thought about it too much, so I hate the story and I no longer want to look at it anymore. And that's when I know it's time to turn it in.
Yeah. All right. From Paul, how much content usually goes into the script of an episode? As in how much plot versus jokes should be in a core episode compared to a one-off episode? How about a 22-minute versus an 11-minute? I guess this is a question about pacing.
Okay, this is a mathy question, and it's
one of those things that you learn as you practice the craft, really. I remember when I was just starting out, when I was like really green at it, I didn't quite have the skill set to know how much plot was needed, how many twists and turns and what felt exactly right. It just came with more and more practice, breaking more and more stories. So when you come up with an idea and then you expand it into an 11-minute or 22-minute story, and breaking the acts, I really do tend to write in 3-act structure though.
I would say generally 11 minutes are about 15 pages and 22s are about 28 pages. And there's like give or take some, if your script is dialogue heavy, it'll probably be a little longer because those jokes run quick. Action heavy things will be shorter because that action runs a lot longer.
Depends on the show, but that's a good ballpark.
And I think writing for 11 minutes, writing for 22s, I think people kind of intrinsically understand because they watch half-hour comedies in live action. But for 11 minutes, you really basically only have one story turn. You don't. That's not always true. You might have two, but your story needs to be a lot thinner because it's just horrible.
You need to nail those plot points pretty quickly.
Yep. 11 minutes is
know what the story is about by like the second page, basically.
And 11 minutes tend to be a lot more joke dense than 22s do because you have a little bit more room. So I would suggest kind of watching, let's say, a season of whichever show you want to do, an 11-minute or 22, and just kind of like take one episode and kind of write down, okay, here are the scenes that happen, here are the beats that happen, and kind of where the act breaks are, kind of figure out the structure and look at that over multiple episodes and go, okay, I'm understanding about how many beats, how many scenes are in an act.
I used to do that, by the way, in college, and when I first wanted to start writing, I'd be like, okay, at 22,
what are they doing here? Yeah.
This has already happened. And I was like, doing that research. So that's good advice to get a feel for how stories unravel.
Yeah. And then it will become intrinsic. So
that's great advice. Everyone watch whatever are a couple of your favorite shows and analyze them like that. From Cam, we just answered this. How many pages long is an 11-minute? 15 pages, you said?
Yeah, 14 to 16, yeah. But
and then 22 minutes or late 20s, like 28 pages.
Yeah.
On our show, we write long scripts because our showrunner likes to be able to cut a lot in the editing room. So he'd rather have more material to cut than less and have to create more scenes to hit that 22-minute.
Yeah. I remember one 22-minute show I worked on, the scripts were like 35.
Too long.
Yeah.
Depends, I guess.
We cut a lot.
I mean, I think we were writing about
35 is too long, I agree.
Yeah. I think 30, you'll find and again, every show will find its rhythm. So, maybe 32 was right for your 22. It'll just kind of.
On Hilda, we tried to keep them at around 25, 26 because the storyboard artists and the storyboard director, they're really like partners, and they like to do a pass of just like adding more time in certain places to create a cinematic effect, or they wanted that freedom, and that was kind of like the flow of the show is they found that the board artist or the director would decide to add time and blah blah.
Right. From Janice, what's it like working in a writer's room for pitch development or new shows that may not be completely established?
It's fun.
Yeah, but generally when you're developing, you wouldn't be in a writer's room that early.
Sure.
Unless they bring you in. Sometimes they bring writers in for like a week or a few days to brainstorm ideas for episodes. Yeah, summit, where they suck your brain juice out and then say sayonara.
Yep.
And then they have a full season of episodes.
Yeah.
I can't say that I won't be above doing that at some point, but something that's done.
Yeah. Generally, I get hired for those when it's like male creators, and they're like, well,
they want a woman brain on that.
Yeah,
that happened at Disney a lot with me.
Yep.
I did a day on your show, Madison, for a half day. Yeah.
W. Kerwan, I heard that a lot of cartoon shows, writing-wise, are led by storyboards. Is that true?
Sometimes.
Maybe.
On home, it pretty much was. I mean, we wrote outlines that were actually not that bare bones, but they're supposed to be, because the board artists would end
6
up,
pages long.
yeah, the board artists would end up writing most of the dialogue and everything,
parts.
fleshing it out. Yeah, so it depends, like, and those showrunners were board driven people. They were storyboard artists themselves. So it kind of depends on, in animation, often on who the showrunner is and how they like to work.
And those shows tend to be more gag driven than story driven. However, I think writing outlines is like completely unsatisfying. It's the most boring part of the experience. And that was a show where our executives would keep asking us questions and having us clarify more things and put more in. And, well, but what's funny about this? So we would have to add more jokes, and it would be 6 pages long. And then the board artist would be, frustrated because it felt like we were overstepping, which, it's their show. They're the writers, basically. But it was like very unsatisfying. And I think the issue is that they hire a lot of very new young writers onto a lot of the board driven shows.
You mean board artists or
no, like writers to write the outlines, and they find a lot of them from, oh my goodness, very cute, from like comedy background, so like sketch comedy and stuff, where what you really need for board driven shows is a writer who understands structure very well and can give the board artist clear structure for the story without a lot of jokes. But they end up hiring a lot of like very funny writers who also aren't very good at structure, so it's a bit of a mess. Yeah,
and I rarely see 22-minute shows that are board driven, because that's insanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very. It's just it's harder to production wise when you don't have a blueprint that everyone can follow. So it's like a lot of people are waiting to find out what the story is going to be and like what's going to actually end up coming together. Kind of.
And the outline from when you turn in an outline and then you see what the board artists have written, what they've drawn, like it can be completely different. So
depending on what show it is, how the showrunners value things.
It's a weird, that's how, so the history of animation, I don't know if you guys care about this, but the history of animation was that there were no writers in animation. It was all board artists or comic strip artists, kind of depends. And then writers
strike
off. So that's why we're in the animation guild as well. So yeah.
But personally, I have fun on board driven shows too. It's it's kind of a different position than writing on a script driven show. It's more like Madison said, you're a structure person and you're an idea machine.
Yep.
So it's fun, and typically it's like less demanding than being a writer on a script driven show, because you're not writing scripts. Out on a script driven show you're writing premise, outline, and scripts, but on a board driven show you're writing premises and outlines, and the outlines should be simpler than on script driven shows, but aren't always. But you just have a different role, but it allows you, personally, I felt like I had more time to work on other projects.
That's true.
I was on a board driven show. And I think that's how some people feel too. Anyways, moving on.
Next question. Next cue. I think you might have answered this, but from Allison, what are some of the biggest challenges working as a writer for the industry? I know you kind of answered like your personal challenges, but is there an overall,
It's interesting,
sort of
man.
working in the industry challenges?
Oh boy. Well, how much
Do
time
you
do
want to go first,
I think
Madison?
my biggest challenge is the fact that we do the same work as live action writers and get a quarter of the money and
Yeah.
like even less respect. I had a friend who was one of my very best friends from high school. They moved out here, and so did I. They are a manager now, or an agent, anyway. But in talking to him, he called me not a real writer, and I have not spoken to him since. That was 4 years ago. So I've had people at mixers, at like a CAA assistance mixer, hear that I wrote for animation, literally stop the conversation and turn away. So.
Because you work for cartoons, that you're not a real writer. Wow.
So that's my biggest frustration.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said because I got disconnected. Someone said you weren't a real writer because you're an animation writer.
Yeah. So that's my biggest beef, is that we do the same work, but people don't take us seriously, even though we do the same work.
It really sucks. I feel like we have to hustle a million times as hard to make money. But I guess I'm trying to think other than that.
I had a
Right
teacher
now,
scoff at me when I told him I wanted to write for animation.
Oh,
yeah, that is
nice.
rude, Katie.
Yep.
That's nice.
But
yeah, I was like,
you're already an animation writer.
Yeah, because I didn't start wanting to write for live action. I was an art animation person, so it was the natural path for me. And so I take a lot of offense. And too, like when live action, like this whole thing with like COVID and live action productions are on hold. So a lot of people are flocking to animation just because it's like what's available right now. And it's a little offensive.
I mean, I would love if what happened when we came out of this is that so many live action writers who worked in animation during this time went, wow, you guys are really good writers and we'll also hire you in live action. But we all know that's not going to happen. So.
And I don't care because I don't want to write in live action.
Yeah, how do you feel
so
about
I'll
that?
never make any money.
From Matthew, I've seen certain shows use a 4-act structure. Is that common in animation?
At Nickelodeon, yes.
Really?
Yeah, but like Loud House. Yeah,
Loud House uses 4 acts?
Yeah, I think
11 minutes?
They break at the midpoint.
Huh.
Okay.
I don't know. It's not common.
Maybe it could be partly for like syndication reasons because there are commercial breaks. I don't know.
Oh, I think maybe that's what it is. It's a break for, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know.
But that's not typical.
Yeah.
I've never even heard of a 4-act structure, so I wonder what that would even...
Hired on that does 4-act structure, you wouldn't have to be worried about the fact that you usually work in a different way. You'll learn however they write their show.
Yep.
Okay. From Allison, how do you go about communicating your ideas to the storyboard artists and the character designers if you yourself are not the best artist?
You just put it in the script. That's not your job.
Yeah.
If you have like a specific reference, sometimes we will have like pre-design meetings with our artists. So like if I'm like, oh, well, this character is based on my friend Lisa, I might send them a photo of Lisa and it's kind of up to them. Or, oh, here's what I was thinking. You might just have those meetings, but if you're a freelancer or if you are on a show where they don't have a lot of communication with the designers, then it's whatever's in the script.
Thanks for all the questions, Allison. Allison sent another one. What, in your opinion, is the best way to bring a character to life?
Emily?
Emily, how did you bring
Specificity
Hubertina to life?
Well, she was just like a wild, horny version of my 12-year-old self, like just unleashed. It was puberty unleashed. So that's kind of, it was the feeling, the stage that I went through when I was her age, where I was boy crazy, but just that times 1,000.
Yeah.
So specificity, I guess, like pubertina was personal to me. So it was based on a lot of my own experiences, but it can help if you think a character you're writing is like someone you know, or a little like a character you've seen. That can help.
Pick an actor or actress that you would cast in the role and write for their voice sometimes. It's good.
From Hannah, how do writers' rooms approach characterization and avoid being out of character? How are differences of opinions reconciled?
Well, usually it's up to part of the reason there's a showrunner is that someone should have a vision for the show, and it's in the end up to them. So that's where they're the person who would be able to say that's out of character for me, or your story editor if that's your responsibility. But that's how we make it work, is there's a hierarchy. That's how it functions.
Yeah.
So yes, a lot of people have differing opinions, but they'll know who their leader is and who their bosses are, and there's a respect in that, and that's how these things go smoothly.
And a lot of times, like, you just intrinsically understand the characters, especially
when you're staffed on a show.
If it's the first season of a show, there is a little bit of like, okay, well, we have the show Bible, so you already know the characters, and
sort of.
And you've probably seen the pilot, and so you sort of have an idea of who the characters are, but there is going to be kind of a stretching period where you kind of go, well, what if we do a story about this character is afraid of the dark, and you kind of have to figure out, is that going to be in character or not? So there is a little bit of like, you're kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit and seeing, okay, could this be in this character's, world? Does this feel like it could be the character? But yeah, you just have to bow to the wishes of the showrunner.
And sometimes it's like especially if it's a comedy, figuring out like, what funny situation can we put this particular character in that will cause conflict for them.
Sometimes on the show that I'm currently on right now, Kid Cosmic, two of the writers will have their own viewpoints, and it's up to like, we're not sure which one to go with. That's when we ask Craig, and and he'll have an answer for us. Sometimes it's not even the two ideas that the two people had, it's a third unexplored idea.
And sometimes it's like, sometimes being a little out of character is worth it for a joke, and that's all kind of up to the showrunner. It's all up to that vision.
But as far as like having differences in the writer's room, I think most writers' room, like the environment should be pretty respectful and collaborative. And part of the art of being in a writer's room as a writer is learning how to, especially in quarantine, let other people talk and hear everyone out. So there's an art to it, definitely.
Forgive my pronunciation again. From CEDA, what are some paths for writers specifically interested in animation to find their way into shows? What position hires the writers? You both have mentioned writers' assistants, right?
PA,
Yeah.
Madison mentioned.
Yeah. Generally, showrunners are in charge of the hiring, but line producers and the execs on the show generally, line producers do a lot of the production hiring, and executives help find writers for the showrunners. So if you can make connections with either of those, that's helpful.
Emily, did you have another thought? Or
I think just again, like getting your foot in the door on any show is good, and making connections, and again, letting everyone know exactly what it is you're hoping to do. Because then you'll be in the back of their mind if an opportunity comes up.
Sorry, I lost my place here. From Allison, how do you handle a scene or a plot theme you want to write that is on the verge of going too far for a kid show? How do you find that balance of telling a good story and still keeping it appropriate for your audience?
I guess think about, like, is this a joke just for me and my friends? Or is this a joke I could see a kid finding funny too?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there can be like some shows that pay a little, give parents a little something that could go a little over kids' heads. But I think generally speaking, think about your audience a little bit.
Yeah, and well, it's also like, you know, are you talking about content that might be too mature for kids? Because that's something that you can find the kid-friendly angle on. So, you know, you might be able to use a metaphor for it.
Like,
you know.
Yeah, say you want a character to hallucinate, but we can't do drugs on a kid's show, so maybe they eat a lot of candy.
Yeah, and then they have a sugar high.
Yeah.
That's their,
Yeah, and you know, like if you care about, well, I want to tell a story about depression, you can find a way to literalize that and make it, find a avenue that feels kid friendly, you know. So instead of actually just being sad or suicidal, you know, is this character, do they have this weight on them, like an actual, somehow there's a weight that's put on them, you know. Can you find a different way to like talk about this feeling that you feel of, like, you know, I feel like weighed down by my sadness. Can you find a different way to talk about that? Or, you know, can you, like, oh, I want to do The Hangover, but we can't do drugs or alcohol. Okay, well, can you do candy? There's always ways to tackle difficult subjects in a way that isn't, you know, too gory or too sad or, you know, too mature.
Sexual.
Yeah. So there's always ways to find a kid-friendly angle.
I find it really fun to write like that, like to disguise, you know, an adult theme and make it accessible.
Yeah, me too.
Kids feel these things.
Yeah.
You know? So you don't have to shy away from it.
Yeah.
Also, we have S&P department standards and practices, and they will tell you if it's not appropriate. So
Yeah.
I
right.
remember when I was starting to try to write and think about stories for different shows, I would go to really dark places. I remember pitching, because I would make friends with some of the showrunners, and I would pitch my idea and they'd be like, ha, we could never do that. Like on Flapjack, this Cartoon Network show, I think I like pitched her up. I was like, what if Captain Knuckles decides he wants to kill himself because he realizes if he kills himself, he'll get to go to candy heaven or something. And then it's about Flapjack stopping all of his suicide attempts in funny ways or something. And I was like, ha ha, that's funny. We can never do that. So yeah, I think it is when you're starting out, just like kind of getting a taste of what is too dark or too far.
And then S&P will eventually, you'll have so many S&P notes that you're like, I'm not even going to try anymore.
Yeah.
Hopefully this question isn't too repetitive. From Matthew, we've already kind of tackled a couple questions that are, what's the best way to get started writing professionally? They add, I'm a PA right now, and I want to move towards writing. So I think you're on the right track.
Yeah, like we said, don't be shy and talk to the writers and try to schedule meetings, Zoom meetings with them. And if they're not too busy, or, you know, they'll probably make time for you. So.
Yeah.
And like Emily said earlier, don't be shy and let people know that you're interested in writing. Obviously, do your job, your current job, to the best of your ability. If you are very good at your job, people will be so much more happy to help you do what you want than if you're not good at your job. But yeah, let people know, hey, I'm just letting you know I'm looking for opportunities in writing. Let your line producer know, let your production managers know, let the showrunner know. It doesn't have to be a big declaration, but just casually let people know what you're looking for.
Cool. Yeah, Matthew, if you're already a PA, you're in a great spot already. From Tim, when you write, do you think in terms of picture/images visual? When you write, do you think in terms of picture and images visually or verbally or other ways?
I don't know.
Do you think
always?
Yeah, I don't know.
Always.
Yeah.
Like all those things.
Yeah. From Laura, how does the former differ from live action screenwriting? Are there any things, formatting faux pas, camera directions, etc., that make an animation script seem unprofessional?
Format. I think one of the biggest differences between live action and animation is that you have to write far more visually. This is a blueprint that you're handing to the board artists. So whereas in live action, you can rely on the actors to kind of find the physical business of the scene. So, you know, somebody's walking in the door and they're, you know, flipping through their mail and throw it on the counter. That's something that you could rely on the live action actors to find. You have to spell that out in animation. Yeah. You know, she walks into the door, she leafs through her mail, bills, you know, whatever it is. You have to spell that out because otherwise you're putting so much more work on the board artists to find some sort of physical thing for the characters to be doing, where in live action, you can just have a dialogue scene that doesn't fly here.
I start to sweat if a scene I'm writing is just dialogue and it's running long. Like because I know that it's not going to be it's going to be hard to make it visually interesting unless there's also action along with it. And in live action, like Madison was saying, there is a lot more kind of like not literally talking heads, but scenes that can be very dialogue heavy, driven, because we're watching living, breathing actors doing shit, you know.
Yeah. But it starts to feel weird when it's just like drawn people, and some of it, yeah, some of it's for kids and short attention spans. I always,
but
yeah, I try and find like a game for the scene. So, you know, can characters have, you know, a conversation or a debate of like, no, tell me what Jessica said, as another character is holding like this candy bar that the other one wants. So, you know, like they're trying to swipe it as they're having conversation, you know, and the button on the scene is they finally get the candy bar, you know. Find ways to keep the scene visual as you're getting out a lot of exposition.
And before we move on, I want to echo what Madison said and add to it. If it's something that we should be seeing on the screen, write it into the script, so the board artist will know to draw it. Yeah.
Also, the board artists, you know, they have, their job is more work intensive. They just have a lot more pencil mileage. So, you know, try not to give them the additional work of like, okay, but they can't just be sitting here and talking. So now I have to come up with a whole thing for them to be doing. Make their lives easier. Let them go home at night.
They can't be walking down the hall at school forever.
Yeah.
It's not the West Wing.
That's a long hallway. I think a few people might have helped Allison here in the chat. She wrote, where can you find TV scripts to read? And I think a couple people sent links in the chat.
Good, because I don't know.
From Sydney, is there any good sources for, same question. Good sources for finding TV scripts and outlines? We must have been talking about that. That's where these questions came in. From Tim, hang on. I think we already answered this too. Can you elaborate how JobWise is to bridge from feature writing to TV writing? I think we touched on that. Yeah. New batch of questions here. Do writers need to have a portfolio? We kind of touched on that. From Laura, how are writers' rooms functioning in quarantine? Any big differences? Yeah. Zoom. Pretty much everything is Zoom.
It's very different. I mean, it's probably one of the easiest jobs to have during quarantine. We're very lucky. But it's like it took a lot of getting used to, because there's having people in the room, there's like a much different energy, and it's a whole different like social dynamic you have to learn with Zoom, like what we're doing right now, where you have to be even more conscientious about letting everyone speak. And I don't know. What would you say, Madison?
Yes, I think that's one. There's no energy feedback. So like, in a room, when you hit on like a good idea or like a good joke, and writers can just kind of riff on it.
You can feel the energy.
Yeah, it feels really good, and it feels like, energizing. That doesn't happen on Zoom.
Zoom kind of makes me sleepier, if anything.
Well, yeah, it's also exhausting because you're always on.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I think, I found that the stories we broke over Zoom are not, like had major problems down the line,
Mm.
and needed more rewriting because people just weren't speaking up
Yeah.
on Zoom, because I think, you know, they do the thing where it's like, well, I think, and somebody else has just spoken. Oh, no, you go ahead. And then like, it's just too much.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, Madison, but we do pretty short. Like if we were in person, we'd be in a writer's room together all day.
Yep.
And we do probably fewer sessions than most shows. Like we were doing just an hour every day together, and then we'd go off with our assignment.
We did like an hour once a week, maybe.
Yeah. So, and then I have also, while there are some benefits of working from home that I enjoy, I do miss, like, I feel like I don't really know the other writers. Because I started my job in quarantine. So, and I was the last writer to be hired. My position was the last to be filled. So the writers had met each other and been working in person for, I think, like 2 weeks with the showrunner. And then they still have never met me in person, which is weird. I feel like I'm not a real person to them or something.
There's definitely that connection with the crew that is missing.
That too. Like I just started asking for meetings between writers and board artists every week, because I really missed the friendships and feeling of camaraderie. So that's
we're
also
a team
a big
making
loss.
something. Yeah,
and because of that, because people feel isolated, I don't know. Yeah, there's just less of a feeling of like we're a united team making something.
And I think that's like a really important piece of advice for animation in general is talk to your board artists. There tends to be this kind of divide, and on show, if your showrunner isn't very specific, trying to be like, hey, writers, these are the board artists, these are the writers. You know, if there's not a conscientious effort to be like, hi, we're a team, we're collaborating, come to us with questions, we'll come to you. You know, if there was on DuckTales, if there was an action sequence, I could sit there and think about it for 2 hours, or I could go to the director or the board artist who I know is going to be on the episode and be like, do you have any ideas for this? Like anything that you want to draw, any like locations you would like to explore? Because it's like, why wouldn't I want them to be invested? And otherwise there does tend to be this like weird divide between writers and board artists, just because there's no communication.
There definitely was on home, even though it wasn't in person. And I don't like that culture. I like everyone to understand it's a collaboration, and that we should all be friends and talk to each other.
Thank you again, Allison, for more questions. Do you have any personal writing exercises that you enjoy, little things you do to keep the creative juices flowing?
I keep a journal, but that's nothing to do with like writing, really. I used to try and journal every day as like a start to my writing, but then I just got tired, so no.
Gosh, keep the creative juices flowing. Again, that's one of the hardest parts of writing. Personally, I can't. It's an ongoing process coming up with new ideas for new shows, because I don't know when something will spark for me and where the inspiration will come from. But I guess just exposing yourself to as many books and movies and people, not too many people, only people who you trust are being safe and wearing masks. But just exposing yourself to art, Something
if
will
you
hopefully spark for you.
and if you don't keep the creative juices flowing, you won't get paid. So there's another incentive to to keep it up.
Yeah. I mean, again,
Yeah.
in a writer's room, this isn't so much problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, like on a day, if you have a day where you don't have any good ideas, it's okay. Like someone else will have good
Mhm.
ideas.
And instantly why I prefer a writer's room.
Yeah.
Also, somebody might have not a bad idea, but an idea that doesn't fit, and you might go, "Oh, but that actually makes me think of this other thing."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not
Yeah,
really a
totally.
problem.
And everyone just builds on that.
Mhm.
And then from Jordan, sorry, I skipped one. From Allison, with writing as your job, have you ever gotten sick of writing?
Yes, I get burnt out all the time.
How do you combat getting burnt out?
I take a hiatus or a vacation. I insist on 4 weeks.
Just take breaks.
I don't really take breaks. I just I don't know. I suffer through it, and then I feel a lot better when I am done.
Madison, you're supposed to be on vacation right now.
Yeah.
Yep, I was supposed to be in the UK. That was supposed to be the time for me to relax and unwind. Not happening. So I guess I'm vacationing at home.
Yeah.
I also just want to say something. Like, writing is really hard, and don't be hard on yourself if you're having trouble with something.
Yeah.
Like, I've have a lot of experience, and I get legit panic attacks like during sometimes when I'm writing a script. So, be easy on yourselves.
Yeah. I've had like PTSD from writing, so it's difficult, and I think also some people feel like, oh well, Emily and I are successful writers and we just automatically think everything we write is great, and we don't have any doubt. No,
Opposite.
I mean, I think that everything I do is garbage, and I'm like, well, whatever, get it out there.
Yeah.
I still have, my partner is also a writer. He reads everything I write before I send it in, and I'm a head writer. Yeah. So
my husband is a writer too, and I rely heavily on him too.
Yeah.
So.
And that's the same for every professional writer I've ever known. They have somebody they send it to. So don't feel like if you question your writing, or if you question, is this any good, you're fine. You're like everyone else.
A lot of times, Emily, if I'll send something to you, if I'm like, hey, can you look at this and tell me if it's any good?
Yeah.
Everybody gets
I've
too
sent
close.
things to you too, Nico.
Yeah.
You get too close to your own projects sometimes, and
Yeah. You need someone else to look at it.
Yeah.
So a pair of fresh eyes.
Yeah, so like that's, professional writers do it too. So it's not something that like you should grow out of.
Yeah. From Jordan, are there any shows you take inspiration or references from when writing?
Not. I honestly, I try not to do that so much. It's personally, I don't enjoy like purposefully referencing things. It's just not my taste. But it won't be like one specific show. It'll be like a trope from something that I'm playing on, or making a twist, adding a twist to. Typically, like, you want to stay away from cliches or things that we've seen again and again, unless you're like making a joke of it or you're adding something new to it. but I don't know what would be the purpose, because another thing is like if you reference a specific show that's not in everyone's consciousness, a lot of audience members might not get it. So
It needs to stand on its own.
yeah, exactly.
But you know, like,
yeah.
I think I did a Rear Window episode on Home.
Yeah, we're doing one. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are like things that you take as like, okay, well, this is an idea I can play on, and it doesn't have to be a one-to-one. But I think shows that inspire. I think there are some shows that like just by. I think what inspires me is character dynamics. So I'm like very obsessed with Psych. I think Burton Guster is the greatest character who has ever been written for television.
See, I don't know that show, so
What's the show?
I miss all your references.
Well, I'm going to text you after this. There's like some personal scuttlebutt to talk about there. But so I love this character, Gus. So like sometimes I'll just, if I'm watching the show, I'll notice that the pattern of my dialogue starts to, you know, kind of mimic, you know, that style of the show. And I think that's also a good way to set tone. If you're writing your own specs or your own pilots, figure out, okay, well, this is the tone that I want, or this is the kind of character I want. So that can help you that way. But I don't think you should ever just be like, well, I'm going to do exactly this.
And it can, for instance, when you're pitching, if you're pitching a show, a lot of the times you'll give a comparison, like an adjacent show, like it's kind of like Broad City meets King of the Hill or whatever it is. That was
Broad City meets We Bare Bears. I don't know
what that is. I don't know what that would be, but yeah, so I think that it can be helpful, but for instance, like one of our younger writers like wrote a reference in the script or in the outline, like it's, if for more information, it's like this scene in this show.
No.
Like specific shows, like cut. Nope. We don't need that. Just describe what we're seeing.
Okay.
Because not everyone watches that show. And
yeah.
But sometimes if it's a trope, like it's like I can give some examples of like things I've recently referenced, like the West Wing walk and talk, or the what was another one?
Oh no, you have two events on the same day.
Yeah. Or iconic things people would probably get from movies.
Yeah. Like a record scratch, we all know, but like kids have no idea what a record is. So, but they understand what a record scratch means.
Yeah.
So
that's a weird one. 6 more questions, and I think we'll cap it off. Do you have any advice about registering scripts through the WGA? When is a good point to do this?
I've done that before, but I don't make a habit out of it.
Yeah.
Hopefully no one's going to rip you off. That would be in very bad taste.
I mean, it does happen, but like it's usually,
there's nothing you can do usually.
Yeah, it's usually when you're pitching things to a studio, they might pass on your thing, but have that idea in their mind and then use it. I've
seen it happen. Yeah.
But that's just
there's nothing you can do.
Nothing you can do. No amount of registering with the WGA will help. I would say when, I can't say your 4th draft, but when you think that you have everything in your episode, there's not going to be huge structural changes, no like character name changes, whatever. That's when I would register it just for protection. It's what, $20?
$25 or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, if that'll help you. I mean, what New Girl ended up having to go through mediation because somebody was like, look, like I have this episode, I think she had like a Bible, and like even
Some other person?
yeah, like they had like similar character names.
Whoa.
So, you know, she had registered it and they were able to go through mediation. I don't remember what the outcome was, the ruling, but yeah. So in case ideas are in the zeitgeist, I follow Jenny Hutchison, and she was talking about how her husband, Nora Ephron's husband, had been researching or interviewing Henry Hill for Goodfellas, and that's what gave her the idea for My Blue Heaven. So like the same idea, core idea, in two different voices is very different. You know, My Blue Heaven is a strange romantic comedy, and Goodfellas is very much not. So,
and if you have shows in development, if you sell a show, you might find out that the same studio is developing basically the same show, but with a different creator, like a different voice. I've seen that happen.
Yep.
And you're like, why? Am I in direct competition with this person?
Mm-hmm.
Probably. Like, it's all competition.
I mean,
but,
the one person who was really into psych, you'll know, The Mentalist is the same show, but far less fun. So, you know.
This is a question from Joe. For some animation pilots, especially those that are action-based with lots of world building, they'll have a 2-part pilot, 44 minutes. I believe DuckTales is an example of this. Do you have any advice for writing these big world action-heavy scripts when pilot samples you want?
I think the question is like, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, whoever's Joe, you're asking, should I write a big 44-minute for a sample?
When the pilot samples they wanted you to keep it 22 minutes. Yeah,
I wouldn't, that is an Uptown problem. Don't write a 44-minute pilot.
Got it.
that's part of the art, usually, of writing a pilot. It's hard to get everything you need.
Yeah, you can't fit everything in one opening episode.
And when you're writing it on spec, don't write a 44-minute. DuckTales was planned as a 44-minute after development, so it had already been greenlit. And so that's when we decided to do a 44-minute pilot, and it had already been sold. So if you were doing, generally nobody's going to be reading a 44-minute.
Right.
So.
But to anyone writing your first episode or your pilot or your first thing or whatever, don't feel like you have to squeeze every single character in the show and every idea all in the first episode. Just have what you need, include who needs to be there, and, you know, get to cousin whoever, you know, down the road.
They have something.
I also want to say that, at least in my experience, pitching animated shows kids shows is a lot different than submitting for writing jobs. Most studio execs don't want to see a script for like an 11-minute animated show, because they want to have a hand in shaping the show, molding it early on into what it will become. And they'll most likely not like that you have a script, or they'll be like, okay, and still want to change it completely anyways. So
it's more, they have more of a hand in it.
Yeah, it's more of a development thing after you sell a show.
That's not to say don't write your script. Yeah,
do it, but just know that it's more going to function. I mean, you can write if you really like the show that you've come up with and the pilot, I would encourage you to write a pitch deck as well. But in any case, this is more, the scripts are more for in animation for submitting for jobs.
Yeah.
Kids animation, adult animation is different.
Let's have a lightning round for the last few questions here. I want to make sure we get everybody. From Tim, any advice on how I can improve on structure as a writer?
Yes.
That's a big one.
I think when you're in the phase where you're figuring out structure, I wouldn't recommend books, but I think that along with looking at scripts from shows and watching shows and studying them, what was the book I found sort of helpful? I think Elephant Bucks. There are some books that can be helpful in laying out traditionally what should happen in like a sitcom.
Yeah.
I think it's Elephant Bucks was one I liked. But yeah, it's just as much research as you can do and reading other scripts.
Anything about the hero's journey?
I would say, like,
thank you.
Do the homework. Okay, break your episode. Don't just have like an idea and then try and write it. Don't just go to script. Sit down, break it into acts, figure out where your act turns are, fill in everything to make sure your story is building to those act turns, and then write an outline. Don't just go to script. You're not doing yourself any favors. Do the work. Outlines are stupid and boring. But that is where your structure comes in. That is where you want to make sure that your structure is completely sound and you are not having to make any choices except for like dialogues and jokes in the script.
Yeah, set yourself up for success.
Yep.
And there's a lot that you can find on act breaks and structure out there that you can then put to practice with your own writing.
And this is just what I do, but once my structure and the story and everything is there, then I go through and punch up all the comedy and add all the gags and the jokes. I kind of worry about that afterwards. Got to focus on the story first. Make sure that's working.
Yep.
If you're doing comedy, of course.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake a lot of people make early on, like I did, where I fell in love with a joke basically, and thought it was enough to be a story. But you never want to start with a joke, because that joke can be no longer useful once you get going on figuring out your story. So.
From Sita, do you truly believe the current climate won't have an effect on changing animation dynamics?
I mean, like live action people taking their jobs?
Do you truly believe the current climate, like the pandemic?
Do you mean that all animation writing will be virtual, or what exactly is the question?
Maybe.
We might need you to...
To be fair, I don't think so. I don't think that there will be a huge sea change in animation writing, unless do you mean like the social justice reckoning? Because I hope that change.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm seeing a change.
I mean in demand.
In demand for animation. It's always an ebb and flow, I think.
Yeah. Right now we've been in a boom for a while, and it's just been continuing with the pandemic because animation has been proven to function. Pretty much
gonna
fine.
Be a tidal wave of animation. There is one now, but it's going to be even bigger next year.
So I just saw a recent question.
Yeah, that was going to be my next one from Dylan here.
Yeah.
Me and a friend of mine were developing a concept for a kid show with a sociopath protagonist. Do you think that
Okay.
could be tweaked in a kid-friendly direction?
I have a lot of experience with this.
Yeah.
I had a show recently, development with Netflix, and we pitched it. It was my husband, my show. We pitched it around, and it had an evil character
Mhm.
protagonist.
Yeah.
And that was pretty hard to get execs behind, because execs are afraid of mean in kids animation, and evil. So, and even though it's been proven to have been done somewhat successfully in like Invader Zim and different shows, they're generally afraid of making a show that has like an inherently sick or social,
Well,
and then recently we got a note on a script that was like, don't use the word sociopath or something. So
yeah,
keep that in
sociopath
mind.
I think is out of favor. It's just all psychopathy.
Yeah, the kid. If they're asking, is there a kid-friendly version?
I think you could probably one kids animation is looking for kid relatable or kid entry points. So you might just want to describe them differently. Are they unaffected or disaffected? Like, find another word for it. And then find what's funny about that character and how they move the plot along. I think.
Someone said give them a cute pet. Maybe that would cut it. I don't know though.
I think they just need to, a lot of what I hear in development is, why do we care about this character? Why do we root for them?
Yeah.
So, even, in Megamind, you still root for him. Breaking Bad, you have an anti-hero. Why do you still want to root for him? So
yeah,
spelling that out instead of being like, he's a psychopath. Is he a rascal?
The question we kept getting with our show with this character was like, but are they really evil? We're like, yeah, they're evil.
But are they really?
But not really.
We have two more questions from Emily. Would writing fan fiction be a good practice on writing specs?
Yeah, just as much as like any creative writing.
Yeah, it's writing. Yeah. Sorry, did I miss a question? Emily? Hello?
Oh.
Oh.
What?
I don't know if you asked me a question or if you were waiting for a response. I might.
No,
yeah. Okay.
Nothing.
Okay.
Nothing from me.
Here's a nice last question from Allison. What's both of your favorite part of your jobs?
Wow, I wish I had a good answer to this.
Yeah. It's being creative. I know that's a broad blanket statement, but just like the creation of characters and funny situations and all that stuff. It's a really fun job, and working with people.
But I think that's mine, is the collaboration with other writers and board artists and directors, other creatives. I like the collaboration. I like that feeling of building off of ideas.
It's really fun.
Yeah. I did theater, and it feels like a live theater performance in the room. Unfortunately, now we have Zoom, but we will get back there.
Yeah, it won't be forever. Can I get the both of you to get into chat and just plug whatever sites you want, or social media, or so everyone can follow you guys?
No. CTN.
Someone just did it
Oh,
for
okay.
me.
Yeah.
Thank you, CTN.
You can follow me or not. I don't check it. So
Yeah, and I don't think you can DM me on Twitter unless I follow you. So
yeah, same.
on my website, on the contact page, you can send me a message there and I'll get back to you.
All right, Emily and Madison, thank you both so much for being a part of this.
No problem.
Thank you, CTN, and thank all of you for watching and tuning in. Madison, Emily, thank you again.
Thank
Have
you, Nico.
a good one, everybody.
You
Talk to
too.
you soon.